Chapter 79. The elders sitting at the round table were silent for a few moments. They simply stared at the statue and the memorial stone that Eugene had pulled out with puzzled expressions. Then someone stood up from their seat. It was a middle-aged man whose gray hair had grown closer to white in shade. It was Doins, leader of the Council of Elders and the immortal Lionheart. Placing his hands behind his back, he slowly walked over to the statue and memorial stone. Doins hummed as he assessed the statue that appeared to be in perfect condition without any trace of damage. The level of realism was so amazing that it was hard to believe that this was just a statue. After Doins scanned the statue, which had been so realistically carved that even the tiniest of the subject's scars had been reproduced, his gaze then turned to the memorial stone placed at its feet. "Hamel Dinas," Doins read. "The stupid Hamel," came a murmur from the elders. Before he had even realized what he was doing, Gilead got up from his seat and approached Hamel's statue. His eyes shifted between the statue's face and the words on the memorial stone, his gaze full of surprise. "Where did this statue? How did you even find it?" Doins turned his head to look at Eugene. That damned fairy tale had spouted all sorts of obscenities and fabrications about Hamel, while permanently labeling him with the title of the stupid Hamel. Now that Eugene had taken out this memorial stone and shown it to them, the epithet given by the fairy tale would no longer be attached to Hamel, and his honor would surely be restored. That was why Eugene was happily watching as the Council of Elders exchanged murmurs, their eyes fixed on the memorial stone. Eugene began to answer Doins's question. "As the elders of the council may be aware, for the past 2 years I have been studying magic in Arath." Naturally, Eugene had already come up with an excuse. During his time in the Royal Library of Arath, Akron, while he had been immersed in the magical texts stored within Wise Sienna's hall, he had been able to learn about Hamel's grave through the grimoire witchcraft. "How?" Doins demanded. "It's because I was the first member of the Lionheart clan to ever encounter witchcraft. I suspect that it was probably due to Lady Sienna's arrangements," Eugene replied, making sure to sound as if he wasn't able to confirm anything and was only making guesses. In any case, that was how he had found out about Hamel's grave. Then Eugene had left for Nahama in order to find the grave. Sir Hamel was an old friend of our great ancestor. Unlike the other members of his party, he wasn't able to return from Helmuth, and instead he nobly sacrificed himself for the sake of his comrades. Eugene trailed off in embarrassment. To call his own death a noble sacrifice, Eugene felt ashamed to have to say these words with his own mouth. But apart from this bit of self-aggrandizement, Eugene's tongue proved to be quite agile as he continued his tale. "While wandering through the deserts of Nahama, I searched for the grave, and I finally discovered its location. Of course, things didn't end up going smoothly. The entrance to Hamel's grave happened to be where the assassins and sand shamans of Nahama had set up their camp." Doins hummed as he took in these facts. "I'm sure that you all are already aware of it, right? That Nahama is using the sandstorms to devour Taraz's territory. The subterranean dungeon where Hamel's grave was located just so happened to be where the group of sand shamans stationed in the desert made their base." From that point on, there was no need for Eugene to continue mixing lies into his story. Everything else was the truth after all. After breaking through the assault of the sand shamans and the ambushes from the assassins, I managed to find my way into Sir Hamel's grave. And there is where I found this statue and the memorial stone. As Eugene said this, he clenched his fists to keep them from trembling in anger. The grave had been seriously damaged by someone. Only the statue and the memorial stone remained intact. In order to give a full explanation of what had happened there, Eugene had to tell them about Hamel's corpse and how it had been used to create a death knight. Eugene calmly unraveled the whole story with a sad expression on his face, but the elders listening to him couldn't hide their agitation. "I barely managed to defeat the Death Knight, allowing me to recover the statue and the memorial stone. But then, I ran into the notorious dungeon master of the desert, Amelia Merwin herself." "Ah!" The elder who was versed in magic shot up from his seat with a gasp. "You bumped into the Death Answer? But then how in the world did you come back alive?" It's because the Demon King of Incarceration personally intervened." As Eugene said this, he glanced up to take in the elders' reactions. The moment that the name of the Demon King of Incarceration was uttered, no one was able to remain in their seats. All of the elders bolted up and stared at Eugene with frozen stiff expressions. The Demon King incarceration? Did the Overlord of Helmuth truly descend on that location in person? Eugene answered their questions calmly. Yes. He stopped Amelia Merwin, who was trying to kill me, and allowed me to leave while spouting something about the oath and his goodwill. Also, he told me to pass on a warning. A warning? He said that freedom without responsibility is just indulgence. It was a warning that his goodwill and Helmuth's continued silence could not continue forever. With this, Eugene had passed on the warning. Eugene had no idea what kind of damn oath Vermouth had made. However, the Demon King of Incarceration had clearly given a warning that the current peace would not last forever. Having heard such a warning, they all needed to make preparations for when this peace finally broke. Doins let out a long sigh and shook his head. I could never have imagined that you would be bringing such earth-shaking news with you. They had summoned Eugene in order to interrogate him about his whereabouts. However, Eugene's interrogation had now revealed an unexpected major issue. One of the elders brought up his concerns. Could it be that Helmuth is preparing for a war with Nahama acting as their vanguard? It's too early to jump to conclusions. If the Demon King truly wanted to end this peace, then there was no need for him to have given such a warning. Doins assuaged their fears. After turning to look at rest of the muttering elders, Doins continued speaking. Freedom without responsibility, it just indulgence. Do you remember what the Demon King of Confinement's exact words were? Eugene shivered and admitted, having faced such a being in person and after I was even addressed by him, there is no way that I can forget that moment for the rest of my life. He wouldn't allow himself to forget those words. Eugene's lips twisted in a grimace as he recalled the murderous desire and rage that he had felt at that time. I feel like I have continued to show a sufficient amount of goodwill and respect to Vermouth's descendants. I have respected their freedom to not show me any goodwill or respect in return. However, I am concerned that you may be taking my continued goodwill for granted. First and foremost, I am the ruler of numerous demonic beasts and demon folk, a king of Helmuth. With freedom comes responsibility. Freedom without responsibility is just indulgence. Descendant of Vermouth, tell this to everyone in the Lionheart clan. Do not take the goodwill that I have granted you as an incentive to go too far. If you will not give me my due regard, then I shall no longer respect you all. Your ancestor may have made an oath in exchange for his freedom, but now the end of that promise is approaching. The time is coming for the wheel that has stalled to resume moving forward once more. Indeed, this is definitely a warning, Doins agreed as he shook his head in dismay and returned to his seat at the round table. He fell into his seat with a thud and was lost in thought for a few moments before finally speaking. First of all, it's clear that the Demon King of Incarceration has left us some leeway. As long as we don't take advantage of his goodwill, that terrible era from 300 years ago should not be recreated in the present. Since he's even gone so far as to give us a warning, I believe that the current peace is sure to be broken eventually, Gilead argued with a hard expression as he glared at Doins. Even now, isn't Nahama still continuing its centuries-long invasion of Turaz? How can we be sure that Helmuth isn't behind their evil scheme and that the Demon King of Incarceration isn't the one who goaded them into doing so? If that's the case, then why don't you go looking for the Demon King of Incarceration and ask him about it yourself, Patriarch? Doins asked sarcastically as he turned to Gilead with a bitter smile. This era has lasted for 300 years. After our great ancestor secured the oath and returned from Hemoth, the Demon King of Incarceration and the Demon of Destruction no longer threatened the world and peace ensued. Patriarch, I have lived for a very long time, and I believe that our current peace is both beautiful and precious. Gilead maintained his silence. Of course, it wouldn't be strange if this peace shattered at any moment. The two strongest demon kings are still alive and well, and the demon folk and black wizards in sworn service to them have spread all over the continent. However, despite all that, peace still endures, Doins stated firmly. Gilead called out to Doins, council leader. Ignoring the call, Doins argued, even the great Vermouth wasn't able to defeat the Demon King of Incarceration and the Demon King of Destruction. Among the Lionhearts, who do you think would even be able to slay a Demon King? Do you think that I'll be able to do it at my age? Or maybe my grandson can do it for me? How about you, Patriarch, do you think you can do it? As Doins spoke, his voice grew increasingly heated. He glared at Gilead as he continued. After gathering all of the Lionheart clan's armed forces, Do you dare to boast that they will be stronger and more skilled than our ancestor and his companions from 300 years ago? I am certain that you won't have the audacity to do so. Our ancestor took just his 4 companions with him to slay the demon kings of carnage, cruelty, and fury. Do you really think that there is currently anyone in the world who would be capable of repeating such a thing? The Lionheart clan aren't the only ones who should feel threatened by this. This warning from the demon king of incarceration is aimed at everyone in the world, Gilead eventually pointed out. Yes, you're right, Doins easily agreed. However, we are the descendants of the great Vermouth. If we do end up confronting Helmuth, it is we who must oppose them from the forefront. Patriarch, in your perspective, do you really think that we are ready for that? Eugene just stood there unmoving, not saying a word. He had been expecting this kind of debate to erupt the moment that he passed on the warning. In any case, this wasn't something that Eugene needed to pay attention to. These armchair generals might quarrel with each other, but this would have no effect on what Eugene had decided to do. Eugene was Hamel's reincarnation. Although he didn't know why Vermouth had decided to reincarnate Hamel, or what Vermouth might have been thinking, Hamel had long ago sworn to kill all of the demon kings. That was also the goal that Sienna, Molin, and Anise, those who had fought together with Hamel, had sworn themselves to. About this warning, while neither the Lionheart clan nor the Kiel Empire would dare to infringe on the demon king's goodwill, the Holy Empire and the Anti-Demon Alliance are still stationing their troops on their borders with Helmuth, one of the council elders brought up. Those savage demon king haters will immediately raise their forces to invade Helmuth once we pass on the warning, Klein said as he sweated profusely. But Doins snorted and shook his head in disagreement. If they were that zealous, they would have already mobilized the troops deployed there. The Holy Empire and the Anti-Demon Alliance have no intention of truly attempting to face Helmuth in a head-on confrontation. It's just a blatant act. If they were to realize that the situation is getting serious, they would immediately withdraw their forces back from the borders. The Demon King of Incarceration isn't the only Demon King in Helmuth, Gilead brought up as he let out a sigh and shook his head. The Demon King of Destruction may have a different opinion from the Demon King of Incarceration. Ignoring Gilead's warning, another elder proposed, the Demon King of Incarceration at least providing a warning that the oath would soon be ending. He even offered us another chance. If the world decides to show him the appropriate respect, then the Demon King of Incarceration might. He might even make another oath with us. The oath whose contents we have no clue about? Of course, the Demon Kings might still just go on a crazy rampage like they did 300 years ago. However, they're not doing so now, right? Eugene didn't want to listen to such squabbles any longer. Interrupting the debate, he asked, "Can I take these things back now?" Although he had voiced his request as a question, Eugene didn't wait for a reply and immediately placed the statue and the memorial stone back inside his cloak. Doins belatedly gave his permission. "Since you are the one who brought it here, then it's fine for you to take it back with you. But what do you intend to do with them?" "I would like to take them to the great ancestor's grave and leave them there," Eugene proposed. "Why there?" Doins asked. Eugene replied, "Sir Hamel's grave has already been destroyed, but please take a look at this memorial stone. Hamel Dinah's. He was a son of a bitch, an idiot, an asshole, a douche, a piece of trash. Ignore the curses, just look at what's written below," Eugene awkwardly requested. "But he was also brave, faithful, wise, and great. In remembrance of this stupid man who sacrificed himself for everyone and was the first to leave us. Our great ancestor sincerely mourned Sir Hamel's death. But the grave that they painstakingly dug for him was destroyed by some wretched scoundrels and has now collapsed completely," Eugene said without any trace of guilt. "For the sake of the long-deceased Sir Hamel, and for the sake of our great ancestor, I believe that this statue and memorial stone should be enshrined within our ancestor's tomb." Doins and the other elders weren't able to give him a reply immediately and couldn't help but ponder this request. Eugene took advantage of the silence caused by their musing and added a few more words. "While I may not have been personally taught by Lady Sienna, I have read the masterpiece that she left behind, Witchcraft, and I managed to obtain a little understanding. My teacher, Sir Lovelian, is someone who had inherited the legacy of Lady Sienna, so in a way I, as Sir Lovelian's disciple, can also call myself Lady Sienna's disciple. To think that the day would come when he willingly called himself Sienna's disciple. In other words, I am both Lady Sienna's disciple and a descendant of our shared ancestor." I am also the last person to have paid tribute to Sir Hamel's grave site. The elders were left speechless by this list of achievements. As such, I believe that I should be the one to personally place this statue and the memorial stone in our great ancestor's tomb, Eugene finally concluded. I understand what you're getting at, Doyne said eventually. However, as you may already be aware, the tomb of our ancestor isn't a place that can be entered as you please. I'm afraid that I can't just grant you permission, but... Doyne stopped speaking for a moment to look around the room. If we're talking about Sir Hamel's memorial stone, I agree that it should be enshrined in our ancestor's tomb. Gilead lent his support to Eugene's proposal. Carmen nodded, and the reactions of the other elders showed that they also agreed. If that's the case, then I have no choice but to open the path leading to the tomb, Doyne conceded. Eugene silently cheered with joy. With this, there was no need for him to search for Vermouth's grave while trying to avoid any attention. I might not be able to open the coffin in front of them, but finding its exact location is an important step. He might not be able to check the contents of the coffin immediately, but he could come back later and open the coffin when he was alone. At that time, there would be no need to pay any attention to avoiding the notice of the Knights of the Black Lion and the Council of Elders. If they determinately tried to block him from doing so, then what was stopping him from beating them up and clearing the path anyway? Since I will need time to open up the path, you should store them with you for now, Doyne instructed Eugene. Yes, accepted Eugene. He needed time. Did that mean the tomb was sealed away with magic? Eugene wanted to openly ask his questions, but he restrained the urge to do so and just nodded quietly. Bringing an end to this issue, Doyne said, Well then, Genos. You should take Eugene to his room. Unfortunately, it seems that the Patriarch's reunion with his adopted son will have to be postponed for a short while. I'm afraid that we still have a lot of things to talk about. Yes, Genos said, bowing his head and approaching Eugene. After bowing his head to the elders and the Patriarch, Eugene turned around and left the room together with Genos. Looking at this situation, it seems that there is no way that they will declare war on Helmuth, Eugene thought to himself as he left. After the clan delivered word of this warning to the Emperor of Kiel, it seemed likely that the leaders of the various kingdoms would gather together to discuss future countermeasures. While it was unlikely that any meaningful measures would actually be taken, the mere act of discussing countermeasures was enough for Eugene to feel justified at having passed on the warning. Kid. As Eugene was walking down the corridor with Genos, the man suddenly spoke up. Once we arrive at the bottom, let me see that statue and the memorial stone once more. That's easy, but why make such a request? Eugene asked inquisitively. I want to offer some flowers to him, Genos revealed. Why bring up flowers all of a sudden? Eugene turned to look at Genos in confusion, only to freeze up at the sight. Genos's eyes were brimming with tears. Eugene hesitated, unsure what to say. Just why are you crying so suddenly? I'm not crying, Genos blatantly lied as he widened his eyes and looked up at the ceiling. I have conjunctivitis, so sometimes tears just flow on their own regardless of what I'm feeling. Was this guy crazy? Eugene didn't ask any more questions and hastened his walk to the elevator. Chapter 80. After Genos escorted Eugene down, he told Eugene to wait there for a bit and then left to go somewhere. He returned before too long, holding a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. Eugene had no idea what this guy was trying to do with those and just stared at Genos with a bewildered expression. The statue? Genos prompted. Ah yes, Eugene quickly agreed. Without asking any questions, no matter how much he wanted to, Eugene pulled the statue and the memorial stone out of his cloak. Right away, a trail of tears started streaming down from Genos's bloodshot eyes once more. No matter how you looked at it, there was no way that these tears were just caused by conjunctivitis. After Genos had stared at the statue and the memorial stone for quite some time, he bowed his head and got onto his knees. Then with a careful hand he placed the bouquet of flowers and the bottle of wine down in front of the memorial stone. Next, Genos first filled a glass to the brim with the wine and placed it in front of the memorial stone. Then he poured a glass for himself and chugged the wine down all by himself. Looking at this scene, Eugene felt like he had no choice but to seriously consider the question, could this bastard really be my descendant? But it couldn't be. This was Genos Lionheart. He was captain of the 2nd Division of the Knights of the Black Lion, and he was definitely Vermouth's descendant. Eugene began speculating, Could a descendant that I didn't even know about have gotten married to one of Vermouth's descendants in order to produce this brat? No, there's no way that could be the case. I definitely never had any children. It wasn't like Hamel hadn't had any experience with women, but he had never left behind any offspring. On top of that, after becoming one of Vermouth's companions, he had never slept with a woman. Sienna and Anise had been keeping their eyes peeled open right next to him whenever the possibility came up. Vermouth and Molen had never shown any interest in going out to have fun at night, and Hamel also wasn't the type to sneak out and go enjoy the nightlife. No matter how much he thought about it, this meant that there was no way he could have left behind any descendants. But then just what was this bastard doing, offering flowers and alcohol in front of Hamel's statue and memorial stone while he cried his eyes out? Ahem, after watching Genos for a few more moments, Eugene let out a low cough. During this short amount of time, Genos had completely emptied all of the alcohol in the large bottle of wine he had brought with him. This ill-mannered bastard. He only offered me a little splash of wine, then he actually drank the rest of it by himself. Although Eugene had this thought, honestly speaking, he wasn't displeased by all this. Eugene forcefully stilled his twitching cheeks and stared down at Genos's back. Sir Genos. Just what kind of relationship do you have with Sir Hamel? Eugene finally asked the question that had been burning him on the inside. Genos, who had been quietly weeping without letting out any sobs, turned his head towards Eugene. While wiping away the tears running down his cheeks with the back of his hand, he let out a long sigh. I am Sir Hamel's disciple, Genos revealed. What kind of crazy talk was this? Eugene barely managed to swallow the cry before it could burst out from his lips. Then he looked back through all the memories from his previous life. A disciple? In his past life he had never once taken in someone as his student. During the time when he had become famous as a mercenary, there had been quite a few people who had come to him, asking to be taught how to use a sword or how to survive on the battlefield. At that time, however, Hamel had been so drunk with self-satisfaction that he had held no intention of dragging around the burden of someone less talented than himself, let alone teaching them. I'm not quite sure I understand what Sir Genos is talking about. Sir Hamel is someone who died 300 years ago, isn't he? From what I'm aware of, he didn't leave behind any descendants, nor did he have any disciples to pass down his teachings, Eugene pointed out. Strictly speaking, what I've learnt doesn't come directly from Hamel, Genos readily admitted. But then why was he calling himself Hamel's disciple? As with all collateral branches, it comes as no surprise that my family line also split away from the direct line. But my distant ancestor happens to be Vermouth's second son, Genos revealed. 300 years ago, Vermouth had taken more than 10 partners and had raised many children. That had marked the beginning of the Lionheart clan. It was unknown what Vermouth had been thinking, but after a certain point he had started to seriously consider how to preserve his bloodline and secure the purity of his lineage. Fortunately for him, among his many children, Vermouth's eldest son was unquestionably the best. In fact, even if the eldest son hadn't been as exceptional as he was, it wouldn't have been much of a problem. Because as long as Vermouth was determined for his eldest son to succeed him and personally provided his guidance, even if his son had been born crippled, he would have been able to instill in his son unparalleled skills that would have made him incomparable to his other brothers. In any case, the eldest son had successfully taken over as the next patriarch after Vermouth, and his many siblings had left the main estate to found their own collateral branches. Genos continued his explanation. My ancestor may not have been able to become the patriarch, but it seems that our great ancestor still took good care of him. According to family traditions, my ancestor wasn't allowed to pass down the white flame formula to his own children, but he was able to pass down a different legacy instead. And what does that have to do with calling yourself a disciple of Hamel? Eugene persisted. The great Vermouth taught my ancestor Sir Hamel's techniques, Genos finally revealed as he wiped his damp eyes and raised his head proudly. Unable to think of what to say, Eugene could only move his lips soundlessly. Eventually he wheezed out, Sir Hamel's techniques? There's something that I would like to ask you, Genos said as he got up off of his knees, holding the empty wine bottle. By any chance, could it be that you have discovered a secret manual written by Sir Hamel in his tomb? Huh. Eugene grunted in confusion. Back then I was watching as you and Sir Carmen faced each other, Genos confessed. In truth, it wasn't really long enough to be called a serious confrontation, but it was enough for me to get a glimpse of your absurd skills. So what are you trying to say? Eugene asked for clarification. The technique you used to divert Sir Carmen's fists. Genos took a deep breath before continuing. That seems almost identical to one of Hamel's techniques that has been passed down from our family's founding ancestor. But among the many branches of the Lionheart clan, ours is the only family that should have inherited Sir Hamel's techniques. Eugene stayed silent. It is an inimitable technique that cannot be used without deep comprehension and control of mana, along with a genius instinct for battle. I couldn't believe it when I saw you use it earlier, but if you have been to Sir Hamel's grave, then it's not completely out of the question. If you happen to have obtained Sir Hamel's secret manual from his grave, it all makes sense. Genos seemed confident in his theory. Eugene's head was spinning in circles. So what Genos was saying was that 300 years ago, that bastard Vermouth had decided of his own volition to teach Hamel's techniques to his descendants? That motherfucker. If you were going to teach it, you should at least have taught it to the direct lion. Why teach it to your second child who couldn't even become the patriarch? Well, now that his techniques had already been taught without his permission, it wasn't like it mattered whether or not Eugene accepted that decision. Smoothing away his twisted expression, Eugene looked Genos in the eyes. Having calmed down, Eugene asked, I don't mind answering your questions, but there's something that I can't quite understand. Why did our great ancestor pass Sir Hamel's techniques to his second child, the one who couldn't become the patriarch? Eugene didn't feel like he could just allow his doubts and complaints to be buried. He wasn't sure if Genos, a distant descendant, would even know the answer, but for now Eugene just decided to try and ask. Because the direct line has no need for such techniques, answered Genos. So it was because Sir Hamel's techniques were seen as inferior to the white flame formula? Eugene questioned resentfully. Genos nodded in satisfaction. Indeed, you really have uncovered Sir Hamel's secret manuals. How had his words been twisted into a confirmation of Genos's suspicions? Eugene glared at Genos without voicing any objections, but Genos just nodded, confident that his guess was correct. If that wasn't the case, then you would have no reason to show such irritation because of that choice, Genos pointed out. You son of a bitch, the reason I have to show such irritation is that I am Hamel. Eugene barely swallowed the angry shout that was about to burst out of his throat. Since it was impossible for him to blatantly reveal his secrets, however, Eugene decided to just allow Genos's misunderstanding to go unchallenged. Genos suddenly changed the subject. These days the Knights of the Black Lion are around to take care of the clan's dirty messes, but do you know who would have filled this role 300 years ago? Huh. Eugene grunted. As the clan went through several generations and the number of clan members increased, the number of dissident elements inevitably increased at the same rate. Soon enough, there were those who proved themselves unworthy of claiming to be our great ancestors' descendants. The ancestor of my branch of the family was the first Black Lion to be charged with the duty of punishing such fools, Genos revealed. Eugene understood what Genos was implying by these words. So Vermouth took his second son, who wasn't able to become the patriarch, and raised him to a hunting dog to keep both the main family and the other collateral branches in line. Even though the Knights of the Black Lion might be called a knightly order or whatever, at their core, they were just vicious hunting dogs. Eugene couldn't help but be lost in thought for a moment, wondering what he should feel about this revelation. This means Vermouth decided that, with my techniques, those hunting dogs would be able to stand up to the renegade users of the white flame formula from both the direct and collateral lines. Or at least that was how Eugene could think of it if he wanted to put a positive spin on Vermouth's sections. From a negative point of view, Vermouth had just passed on his late friend's skills to his pet hunting dogs in order to make them more efficient predators. That rotten bastard. If you were going to screw me over like that, you could have at least gotten your children to put up a statue of me in their homes, Eugene complained as he tried to calm the irritation boiling up within him. Genos had nothing more to say as he calmly gazed at Eugene's face and waited for a response. About the techniques that your family inherited from Hamel. It wasn't just parrying, was it? Eugene probed. Ignition, Genos said abruptly without any warning. By doing so, Genos had hoped to provoke a reaction from Eugene, but Eugene's face didn't show any sign of surprise. Vermouth, you son of a bitch. Although he outwardly didn't show any reaction on the inside, Eugene was verbally chewing Vermouth out. For now he decided to pretend ignorance. And what is that exactly? It's a technique where you intentionally accelerate the mana in your core, Genos explained. Because of its dangers, the technique is rarely used. Having confirmed what he wanted to know, Eugene asked, "Why are you interested in knowing if there was a secret manual? If you do have a secret manual in your possession, I request that you surrender it to me," Genos honestly replied. "And why should I hypothetically surrender it to you?" Eugene continued pressing. Genos repeated, "I've said this before, but Hamel's techniques are extremely difficult to learn. Even if you can see through the theory behind them, it would be difficult for you to imitate them with your body. It isn't so easy to teach them either. However, if you happen to have found a secret manual, then I could." "To start off with, let's get the order of seniority straight," Eugene said, suddenly interrupting Genos. "From a certain point of view, you could say that I am the direct disciple of Sir Hamel, so if we put ourselves into the order of seniority, wouldn't that mean I am of a higher rank than Sir Genos?" "What?" Genos muttered in confusion. "That means I am the senior disciple and you, Sir Genos, are the junior disciple. Although you may have been born a few decades earlier than me, if you truly consider yourself to be Sir Hamel's disciple, then you need to accept me as your senior brother," Eugene insisted. "What are you saying all of a sudden? Hold on. Do you mean to say that there really was a secret manual in Sir Hamel's tomb?" Genos eagerly picked up on Eugene's hints. But Eugene quickly disappointed him. "I burned it after memorizing it." "What? Why?" Genos burst out in protest. "If I didn't do that, then what else was I supposed to do with it? Didn't you hear me talking about it earlier? I almost died in that grave. It was already a stroke of luck that I managed to find that." Here Eugene paused guiltily. "That secret manual. I was risking my life by fighting a death knight, remember?" These words caused Genos's eyes to waver in shock. "Hold on. Does that mean you were able to use Sir Hamel's parrying technique only a few days after you discovered the secret manual?" Genos questioned incredulously. "I've always been good at parrying," Eugene said as an explanation. "That's ridiculous." Genos rejected his excuse. "Sir Hamel's parrying is a completely different technique from ordinary parrying. It seems that you don't know much about me, but you should be aware that I was exceptional enough to be adopted into the main family. And I am the youngest genius among all the geniuses who were given permission to enter Akron." Although it felt a bit embarrassing to make these claims with his own lips, everything that Eugene had said was the truth. "So then what are you going to do? If Sir Genos accepts me as your senior brother, then I would be willing to compare the secret manual that I have stored in my head to the techniques belonging to Sir Hamel that have been passed down through Sir Genos's family. That way, you might be able to fill in any missing content." Unable to think of what to say, Genos's lips twisted soundlessly. At first, Eugene had felt offended by this guy who claimed to be his disciple when he had never even granted him the right to do so. But that being said, Eugene couldn't find it in himself to dislike Genos. After all, wasn't Genos the only person in this world who was carrying on Hamel's legacy? "He even offered me flowers and shed tears for me," Eugene recalled with gratitude. From this, it seemed that Genos truly admired Hamel and respected him as his master. Because of that damned fairy tale, Hamel had been looked down upon and called the stupid Hamel for hundreds of years. So Eugene couldn't help but feel pleased at finding someone who still respected Hamel enough to consider themselves his disciple. "Could you truly have memorized that entire secret manual?" Genos asked doubtfully. "If you're not going to believe me when I say it, why even bother asking, one? Just trust me," Eugene demanded. Reminded of how Amelia Merwin had kept probing him, Eugene couldn't help but be annoyed as he thought of how that damn bitch had spoken to him so rudely. "Do I need to call you my senior brother in front of others?" Genos asked hesitantly. This was a very important issue for Genos. Even amongst the Knights of the Black Lion, Genos was famous for being strict and difficult to handle, and as the patriarch of his own family branch, he needed to protect their reputation as well. "If that happens, I will also be placed into a troublesome position, since I might be forcefully questioned about our relationship." "You can just leave that for when it's just the two of us," Eugene charitably allowed. Genos let out a low hum as he fell into thought. After considering it for a while, Genos finally nodded his head and said in a very embarrassed tone, "Senior brother." "Good choice, junior brother. But just how long are you going to keep me waiting here? You said that you were going to guide me to my room, so when exactly do you plan on showing me the way there?" Eugene immediately accepted the appellation without any sense of discomfort as he packed the statue and memorial stone back into his cloak. Genos's cheeks twitched at Eugene's quick change of attitude from respectful to condescending. However, he didn't dare to snap at Eugene, so he just ground his teeth in anger. "Were you grinding your teeth just now? Does my attitude bother you? Don't you think that you're being a bit too disrespectful of your senior brother?" Eugene was quick to criticize his newfound junior brother. Genos reluctantly gritted out, "My apologies. I understand that this might be a bit embarrassing and difficult to adapt to at first, junior brother. However, I hope that you get used to it as quickly as possible," Eugene encouraged. Genos just kept his silence. Eugene prompted him once more, "So when exactly are you going to start leading me to my room?" Eugene's room was in the front keep of the castle, set apart from the rooms where the Knights of the Black Lion and the elders of the council resided. Since it would take a few more days for Cyan to finally arrive at the Black Lion Castle, until then the only ones residing in this section of the castle were Eugene and the castle servants. "Let's start things off with you reciting all the techniques that have been passed down through your family, junior brother," Eugene said as soon as they arrived at his room and he had gotten comfortably seated. "There are a total of 10 techniques that have been passed down from the founder of our line," Genos slowly revealed. "There's actually 10 of them?" On the inside, Eugene felt surprised by this, but he just nodded with a calm expression and asked, "So what are they?" Slightly suspicious, Genos paused before continuing. "As senior brother should already know since you have seen the secret manual, Sir Hamel's techniques are founded on the use of mana, not weapons. As such, their usage cannot be limited by whatever weapon you wield." Eugene interrupted him, "Like you said, I already know about all that. So why don't you just tell me what the 10 techniques are already?" "Did I really have 10 techniques?" Eugene asked himself doubtfully. No matter how much he scratched his head, Eugene really couldn't understand what this claim was based on. In the first place, the only technique he had developed in his previous life that he felt was significant enough to attach a name to was ignition. Everything else that he had used in battle was just him fighting according to the situation and what he had on hand. So which bastard had come up with 10 techniques to be passed down through Genos's family? Increasingly doubtful, Genos finally recited, "The ultimate technique of the Hamel style, ignition." "Hamel style? What the hell is that?" Hamel demanded. "You mean you don't know? The Hamel style is everything that our great ancestor taught to the founder of my family," Genos explained. "That name, could it have been our great ancestor who personally attached that name to this set of techniques?" Eugene asked resentfully. Genos shrugged. "I can't be sure about that myself. But from the very beginning, the name that has been passed down through our family is the Hamel style." Eugene dropped his face into his hands as he was overcome by embarrassment. "Vermouth? Vermouth, you son of a bitch. If you were going to stick a name to it, you should have chosen a good one. But of all things you went with Hamel style? Were you insane?" Ignoring Eugene's preoccupation, Genos continued, "Hamel style number 1. Mana parrying." Eugene silently allowed him to continue. "Hamel style number 2. 1,000 thunderclaps." Oh motherfucker. Eugene couldn't bear to keep listening and had to clap his hands over his ears in shame. Watching this, Genos tilted his head with a puzzled expression on his face and asked, "Senior brother? What's the matter?" "No, this is, fuck, arg, just keep going." Eugene finally bit the bullet and ordered Genos to continue. 1,000 thunderclaps? 1,000 thunderclaps? When exactly did I come up with a skill like that? No matter how much he rifled through his memories, Eugene couldn't recall a single moment when he had ever shouted 1,000 thunderclaps while swinging his weapon. Chapter 81. Profound Mystery of the Hamel Style, Ignition. Number 1. Mana Parrying. Number 2. 1,000 thunderclaps. Number 3. Lightning Counter. Number 4. Azura Rampage. Number 5. Dragon Burst. Number 6. Cyclone. Number 7. Dead End. Number 8. Poltergeist Aegis. Number 9. Infinite Purgatory. After speechlessly listening to this long list of cringeworthy names, Eugene immediately wanted to commit suicide by sticking his nose in a shallow plate of water. In his previous life, had he really ever fought while shouting out the names of his attacks like this? Suddenly, Eugene realized that he actually had. He had completely erased those incidents from his memories, never wanting to recall them again. But as he was listening to Genos reciting the names of these techniques with a serious expression, The shameful memories that he had buried in the deepest levels of his mind were being uprooted one by one. Azura rampage. Why is that bastard making such a fuss? It must be because of his overinflated ego. What the hell does swinging a sword all over the place have anything to do with an Azura rampage? Don't you also call out fire blast and shit like that when you're just letting off some fucking fireworks? That's because the spell's name is Fire Blast. I didn't give it that name. You should already know that spells can't function without incantations, so what are you looking at me for? You too, Anise, when all you're doing is just shining some light, you shout Holy Cross, don't you? I at least make the light into the shape of a cross. It seems like you guys don't realize this, but swinging a sword is a lot like using magic. We're both using the same type of mana, so what exactly is the difference? So what, are you really saying that shouting Azura rampage makes your technique stronger? Of course it does. By letting out a battle cry you can exert more strength. Although the expressions that Sienna and Anise would make in response showed that they definitely didn't understand what he was talking about, Molan would always nod his head in appreciation of these words. I think it's cool. Whenever Hamel shouts Azura rampage while swinging his sword, Hamel really does look like he's turned into an Azura. He gets it. He gets shit. Eugene trembled in agonizing embarrassment as he recalled this distant memory. At that time Hamel had been far too young and immature. But Hamel had just turned 20, so wasn't it only natural for him to have been a bit immature at that young age? Eugene confirmed that these were the 10 techniques whose names he had called out as he had used them. As time went on he had stopped shouting each of those name techniques. It had gotten embarrassing to do so, and he hadn't even needed to call out their names either. As far as Eugene could remember, he had only fought like that, foolishly shouting out the names of his attacks for a few years. This meant that an overwhelmingly longer amount of time had been spent fighting without needing to shout their names. But Vermouth, that bastard, still recalled each of the names that Hamel had foolishly given them, and he taught these names alongside Hamel's techniques to his own son. His face flushed red in embarrassment. Eugene's head fell into his hands as his shoulders trembled in shame. Rather than being reincarnated, he should have been returned to the past instead. That way he would have been able to stop himself from shouting the names of his techniques like an idiot. Or else he could have just killed the old Hamel with his own hands. Then I could have killed Vermouth, that son of a bitch, as well, Eugene thought wistfully. There was also that damn fairy tale. He could understand why Hamel might be less respected than his past life's comrades, since he was the first to die, but wasn't that ridiculous depiction of him going too far? Although he could understand that it might have been done out of a desire to keep the deceased Hamel alive in people's memories, but still. Eugene cursed. If you were going to allow something like that to be written, then you shouldn't have reincarnated me. Why would you resurrect a deceased person only to force them to read such a damn fairy tale about their life? And now, Eugene was even being forced to re-listen to the embarrassing technique names that he had come up with in his youth from a complete stranger. After struggling to get a grip on his emotions, Eugene raised his head. Genos was looking at Eugene with a confused expression. Seeing this look on his face, Eugene once again felt a violent desire to off himself. Are these 10 techniques all there is? Eugene asked, avoiding any explanation for his actions. Yes. Are you implying that there were more techniques than these in the secret manual that you discovered, senior brother? Genos asked eagerly. Eugene hesitated as he thought about what to say. That's not the case. In there, let alone those 10 techniques. There wasn't even a single technique like those ones written down within the manual. What did you say? Genos demanded as his eyes widened in surprise. The gears in Eugene's head spun desperately as he crafted an explanation. He was faced with a major problem. What should he say here in order to best restore the honor of the deceased Hamel, while also ensuring that those fucking stupid technique names would no longer be passed down to the future generations? That's it about those techniques. Those are all things that Hamel came up with when he was still young and immature, Eugene explained, gaining confidence. Genos asked doubtfully, how can you be so sure of that, senior brother? Well, the reason for that is because the manual I found didn't have any techniques like that. Although there's nothing wrong with what our great ancestor may have taught the founder of your family branch, in my opinion. I believe our ancestor may have been recalling the techniques that Hamel had solely used in his youth when he taught your penultimate ancestor, junior brother, Eugene theorized. That makes sense, but to think that the techniques that Sir Hamlet used in his youth were so amazing that they remained indelibly imprinted in our great ancestor's mind, Genos marveled. Just why did Genos keep twisting Eugene's words like this? Eugene tightly clenched his trembling fists as he continued speaking. Well, I guess you could see it that way. Although he might have been overshadowed by the brilliance of our great ancestor, Sir Hamel was also an exceptional and amazing person. That makes sense. But to think that the techniques that Sir Hamlet used in his youth were so amazing that they remained indelibly imprinted in our great ancestor's mind, Genos marveled. Just why did Genos keep twisting Eugene's words like this? Eugene tightly clenched his trembling fists as he continued speaking. Well, I guess you could see it that way. Although he might have been overshadowed by the brilliance of our great ancestor, Sir Hamel was also an exceptional and amazing person. Sir Hamel's techniques have been passed down through our family over a long period of 300 years, and we have always respected him as our master. My father, who left this world a long time ago, and even my child, 3, who is not currently staying in the Black Lion Castle. Every generation of my family has cultivated Sir Hamel's techniques. As Genos proudly declared this, he placed a slight emphasis on the word child. Although he had accepted Eugene as his senior brother, Genos was reminding Eugene that he was closer to Genos's child in age. These words might seem to be coming out of the blue, but my child also participated in the bloodline continuation ceremony 16 years ago. They're currently 26 years old, said Genos, emphasizing once more the difference in their ages. Oh, is that so? Eugene said to show he was listening. But what was the point of telling him that? Eugene allowed Genos's words to flow in one ear and out the other. Returning to the main topic, Eugene said, Junior brother, I believe that you may be misunderstanding something. I too respect Sir Hamel. Even before I discovered his secret manual, I have always held a great amount of respect for Sir Hamel. Also, it's not the techniques themselves that I consider embarrassing, but their names. Their names? Genos muttered in confusion. Junior brother, be honest with me. Let's place our hands on our chest and promise to speak only the truth. 1,000 thunderclaps? Azure rampage? Dead end? Dragon burst? Poltergeist? Aegis? Infinite purgatory? Don't you think that these names are really embarrassing? Eugene struggled slightly at the end, but managed to get through the worst of the embarrassment. Even Genos couldn't give an immediate response to these words. After hesitating for a few moments, his gaze wandered aimlessly as he muttered defensively, Lord Carmen's ultimate attack is called the Destiny Breaker. Quite the impressive name, Eugene complimented sarcastically. Her Iron Fist combo is a combination that starts with Eclipse, then uses Emperor Blow and Lightning Strike before finishing with Destiny Breaker. It has a reputation for being particularly fierce and powerful, even among the Knights of the Black Lion, Genos stated. I think you're the one who's a legend for memorizing all of that, Eugene muttered in serious admiration for his memory. Although Eugene had gotten this feeling from the very first moment that he had seen her holding an unlit cigar in between her lips, his great-aunt Carmen Lionheart seemed to be quite the amazing person. Eugene dismissed Genos's argument. Sir Carmen is Sir Carmen. But what about you, junior brother? Do you also shout something like, Azura Rampage, whenever you use it in a fight? Inside my head I do, Genos muttered quietly. But are you able to shout it out loud? In front of all your subordinates, all the proud members of the 2nd Division, can you really shout Poltergeist Aegis? In front of them? Eugene continued applying pressure. It's not like you need to say it out loud, right? Genos argued. Eugene celebrated his victory. See. Even you, junior brother, can't shout out those names in public because they're so embarrassing. So how do you think Sir Hamel would feel? That's why he didn't write the names of those techniques down in his final secret manual. After all, once they've been mastered completely, you can use them without having to shout the names of the techniques. Genos wasn't able to come up with a response to that, so he just kept his lips tightly shut. Taking pity on him, Eugene changed the subject. Well, enough about the names of the techniques. Let me take a look at them. You mean right now? Genos questioned. If it's a bit inconvenient for you to show them to me, you can just write them down for me to read. After all, you know that the way that you apply your mana is different with every technique, so how am I supposed to know where to start? Eugene argued reasonably. That's, Genos finally let out a long sigh and shook his head. I don't mind showing them to you, senior brother, But like I said earlier, Sir Hamel's techniques are incredibly complex and difficult to learn. As such, even now that 300 years have passed since then, the teachings of our great ancestor couldn't be fully reproduced. That was an understandable result. The second son, whom Vermouth had taught personally, might have been incredible enough to learn those techniques with just his own body, but there was no way to guarantee that all his descendants would be as exceptional. They probably wouldn't have been able to improve it either, estimated Eugene. Instead, it might even have degraded. Eugene couldn't help but feel a little bitter about this fact. Though this disappointment wasn't just because his techniques hadn't been fully inherited. I should have just founded my own school instead. That way, I would never have had to hear such embarrassing techniques spoken about again. Eugene tried to calm the regret simmering inside him. Meanwhile, Genos had obtained a pen and paper from a servant outside and was now sitting down at the room's desk. "Junior brother, have you ever entered our ancestor's tomb?" Eugene suddenly asked as he was looking out the window. Even as Genos was busily writing with his pen, he managed to answer Eugene's question. "I went there once, on the day that I became a captain." "Really?" Eugene prompted. "It's not just me. Everyone who is appointed to be a captain in the Knights of the Black Lion must enter the tomb of our ancestor at least once, so that they can swear an oath to him that they will defend the family even if it means sacrificing their own lives." "What kind of place is it? Don't picture it as anything too grandiose. I can't describe it to you in too much detail as the place is meant to be kept extremely secret, but unlike Sir Hamel's tomb, it doesn't even have a statue or a memorial stone." Genos stopped talking and fell silent for a few moments. "If I had to put it into words, it looks more like a shrine." "A shrine?" "Like any one of the many shrines that can be commonly found throughout the world. Although it's not like the place is really used to worship a god, it just so happens that the tomb of our ancestor who managed to save the world really resembles a shrine. Perhaps our ancestor may have become a god after he died and the shrine is meant to honor him. Or maybe that's just what he wanted. A god." As he continued looking out the window, Eugene's eyes narrowed. Just like in his past life, Eugene didn't hold much faith in gods. That's not to say that he actually questioned their very existence. After all, wasn't the divine magic that could only be cast by their priests proof of their god's existence? However, believing that a god existed and having faith in them were two completely different matters. Rather than a god who could be hiding who knows where, Eugene found that a sword, a spear or any other weapon that he could hold in his hand was more reliable. So Vermouth became a god? What if that was the case? Eugene started to feel like this could be a real possibility. He didn't know about anyone else, but if it was Vermouth you were talking about, he really might have been able to become a god after he had died. Because if that guy really did become a god, then this would explain how he was capable of miraculously reincarnating his deceased comrade. But if he really did become a god, then there's no reason for him to have fought with Sienna. Then perhaps the one who had broken into his grave hadn't been Vermouth, but someone else. However, Eugene's suspicions couldn't be completely swayed into believing this line of thought. Because who in the world, other than Vermouth, would have been able to find Hamel's sealed grave, open up the coffin in order to retrieve Hamel's corpse, seal away the moonlight sword, and then defeat Sienna who had come to stop him? "I've finished writing them down," Genos said after a few hours had passed and he got up from his seat. Eugene looked down at the heap of papers that he had been handed, his expression twisting into a frown as he read the very first page. "The Hamel style. Motherfucker," Eugene cursed at how awkward it sounded. After needlessly shooting a glare at the innocent Genos, Eugene started reading what Genos had written down about this damned Hamel style. It was probably due to the fact that Genos had taken several hours to write it all down, but his explanation of the Hamel style was extremely detailed. To the extent where, if you were already good at controlling your mana, you would be able to start practicing the Hamel style as soon as you obtained these notes. However, it didn't take Eugene more than 10 minutes to read it all, let alone several hours. After reading the whole thing, Eugene flipped back to the first page. Then he read it once more. "It sucks," Eugene eventually judged. The mana operation instructions themselves were excellent, without anything to criticize. Genos's ancestor who had first learned the Hamel style must have practiced the white flame formula, but his subsequent descendants were not allowed to learn the white flame formula. However, the Hamel style didn't differentiate between users of the white flame formula and the red flame formula, and only concerned itself with teaching the methods of operating their mana. It must have been Vermouth who had improved the Hamel style to the point where it could be used with both the white flame formula and the red flame formula interchanged. Because if it wasn't for his involvement, there was no way that these instructions could have been as neatly organized as this. However, the connection between the usage of their techniques and their mana fell far behind the refined operation of their mana itself. After reading it a few times to confirm his suspicions, Eugene knew that the Hamel style's mana operation methods had been adapted so that the difficult and laborious physical training was no longer required. This had resulted in the mana operation not being as smooth as it should have been. It doesn't just suck, this is complete shit, Eugene realized as he kept reading. Since the mana operation wasn't smooth, their connection to the techniques couldn't help but fall behind. It wasn't difficult for Eugene to figure out the reason for this. It was clear that the idiots who had inherited the Hamel style had decided on their own volition to add their own touches here and there, hoping to resolve a few of the things that they felt were inconvenient. It must have been because physical training as a whole had been pushed into obsolescence since quite a while back. Even if it couldn't compare to the white flame formula, the red flame formula was a mana operation method that wouldn't be looked down on no matter where in the world it was found. As they were already practicing such an exceptional red flame formula, the inheritors of these techniques must have felt that it was unreasonable for them to have to keep up the old-fashioned physical training as well. And it looks like they even came up with their own ways of efficiently applying mana to their techniques. Others might have called these an improvement, but in Eugene's view, these were nothing more than a regression. Still, they seemed to have worked hard to try and supplement the shortcomings of their Hamel style, making the techniques at least usable. There's quite a difference between these and what's written in the secret manual, Eugene muttered as he went over to the desk and sat down. He picked up a pen and then turned to look at Genos. Junior brother, does the red flame formula that you've learned also enable you to split off your cores? Our formula can reach up to the 5th star, Genos replied. Eugene continued, and how many do you have, junior brother? I have all 5 stars, Genos declared, puffing up his chest in pride. Although this was something to be proud about, Eugene didn't really feel much of an emotional reaction. After all, hadn't even Garjatha's family managed to increase the number of stars in their red flame formula to 5? Or course, even if the number of stars was the same, the power of their respective formulas might still be different. But Eugene felt that Genos's red flame formula couldn't be all that different from Garjatha's red flame formula. Eugene hesitated. It would be a bit too much for me to demand that he do physical training at this point. He had instructed Cyan to do so, but Cyan was a completely different case. Cyan was still young and even his white flame formula was still in its growth state, so there was no big issue with adding physical training on top of that. However, Genos had already put on a lot of years, and he had mastered his red flame formula to its fullest extent. By this point, even if he did take up physical training, it would be difficult for him to break out of the habits that he had become accustomed to any time soon. In fact, there was no need for him to be so concerned about this. Eugene could have just gotten away with giving Genos a quick explanation. However, Eugene didn't want to do that. Although he hadn't personally accepted any disciples, Genos still sincerely claimed to be a disciple of Hamel. Since that was the case, then as his nominal master, shouldn't Eugene at least try to correct his disciples' understanding? After pondering some more, Eugene picked up his pen. First of all, he erased the words Hamel style by scribbling over it. Why are you erasing that? Genos protested. Just be quiet, Eugene ordered. After that, he erased each of the 10 separate techniques apart from ignition. Hamel hadn't used the other techniques much as he grew stronger, but ignition had seen use right up until the very end, so he definitely couldn't erase it. After having mangled their connections to the mana operation to such an extent. 1,000 thunderclaps? That's just spewing out sword force, isn't it? Idiots. Do they think that it's funny to waste their mana by using techniques like this? Eugene let out a sigh of frustration and then began to revise the techniques. Genos stood behind him and peeked at what Eugene was writing with narrowed eyes. But soon Genos's eyes started wavering in surprise. Eugene had claimed to be a genius, and it seemed that he truly was exactly what he claimed to be. Regardless of whether or not Eugene had truly managed to completely memorize the secret manual, it would have been impossible for him to revise the Hamel style like he was doing now without Eugene himself having fully understood both the contents of the secret manual and the nature of mana. Genos adjusted his posture, changing his slightly casual stance. In front of this senior brother who was quite a bit younger than him, Though he had initially only decided to treat Eugene like a senior brother for the sake of the secret manual, Genos now couldn't help but feel a sense of awe towards him. Eugene's focus wavered. Now that I think about it, junior brother. Yes, senior brother, Genos quickly responded. Eugene admitted, I forgot to tell you this earlier, but it's about Cyan. I also taught him a little using what's in Hamel's secret manual, you know? Genos seemed confused as to why Eugene had brought this up. All right. Even so, that doesn't mean that you need to call Cyan your senior brother. Instead of calling him that, you should just pretend not to know about it, Eugene instructed. Why would you want me to do that? Genos asked. Eugene explained, it would be bothersome for me to have to explain the situation. And I didn't even teach him any of Sir Hamel's techniques. I just taught him a bit about the methods for operating his mana. Whether it was the 1,000 Thunderclaps, Azura Rampage, or Infinite Purgatory, Eugene had no intention of teaching Cyan such embarrassing techniques. Although it was impossible right now as long as Cyan kept diligently carrying out his training. Then even if Eugene didn't teach Cyan any techniques, the latter would be able to come up with techniques that suited his body all on his own. Since he hasn't received official instruction, Cyan can't really be considered Sir Hamel's disciple. As such, there's no need for you to call him senior brother. Also, you should keep this in mind, junior brother. This dogshire. These Hamel-style techniques, they aren't impressive enough for you to be so obsessive over, even going so far as to defend their names. Instead, by getting caught up in these techniques, all you're doing is limiting yourself from what you're fully capable of, Eugene concluded his impromptu lecture. Without saying anything in response, Genos just silently listened. His senior brother, who was just turning 19, was actually seriously discussing the limitations of these techniques with him. This was an issue that should have had Genos, who had been training for such a long period of time and had gone through so many dangerous fights, reacting to Eugene's opinion with derision. However, Genos didn't feel that way at all. Instead, he just accepted it as a reasonable opinion. Junior brother, from now on you should also try to break free of the Hamel-style techniques, Eugene advised him. Your words are justified, senior brother, Genos accepted. But senior brother, are you truly able to fully use the Hamel-style techniques? If I wasn't able to use them, then how else could I have revised them like this? Please don't take any offense. It's just, I'm curious to see the extent to which senior brother truly comprehends Sir Hamel's techniques. Eugene let out a deep sigh and then pushed his chair back as he stood up. Fortunately, this room was spacious enough that it could even compare with a good-sized gymnasium. Eugene first checked to see if there were any traces of observers, then he pulled WYD out from his cloak. Look closely, Eugene ordered. The stars around his heart began glowing and rotating. The ring flame formula amplified his mana and a bluish-white sword force engulfed WYD's blade. Genos's expression twisted in surprise as he saw above the color of the light in Eugene's absurdly high mana density. Eugene ignored Genos's surprise and held WYD in front of him. The wavering sword force transformed into a fierce flame. These shifting flames condensed towards the tip of the sword and swelled up to form a large sphere. Eugene slightly twisted his wrist as he adjusted the flow of his mana. With this, the sword force that had been gathered into the sphere burst forth and engulfed an empty patch of air. The bluish-white flames swirled in the air before regathering in one spot. Genos gasped, "Infinite Purgatory." "Please just shut the fuck up," Eugene hissed. "But how could you cast Infinite Purgatory so simply when it consumes a vast amount of mana?" Genos asked in disbelief. As long as it was used properly, this technique could even swallow a mountain, though of course, it was impossible for Eugene to show such an extreme output with his current limited reserves. But even if Genos used the Infinite Purgatory that he had learned from his family's Hamel style, it would be limited to this size at best. That was just how much worse it was than the original. "Are you satisfied now?" Eugene asked. "Please show me your poltergeist aegis as well," Genos begged. "As long as I wrap this mana around my body, that's the poltergeist aegis, so what's the point of me showing that to you? Instead of uselessly making me waste my strength, just take this with you and go." Eugene spat out as he shoved the completely revised document over to Genos. "Oh, and junior brother, if Lady Carmen or some other person asks you to take me as your squire, just flatly refuse them, okay?" "Do I really need to do that?" Genos asked reluctantly. "What?" Eugene questioned. "Do you really want to call me, your senior brother, your squire instead?" Genos quickly denied this. No, that's not what I meant. It's just that if someone like you, senior brother, becomes a member of the Knights of the Black Lion. Otherwise, I won't give this to you, Eugene threatened him. Genos quickly folded. I'll make sure to refuse them flat out. Then Genos bowed his head deeply as he accepted the document containing the revised Hamel style with both hands. Chapter 82. What are they doing in there without coming out all day? Seal pouted her lips as she glared at the keep. Since they had finally reunited after years apart, she had wanted to share a meal with Eugene, then take him on a tour of the castle, or maybe even go with him on a long walk through the mountains. However, after Eugene had immediately passed the test and entered the fortress, he hadn't even taken a single step out of his room. Usually, Eugene wasn't someone who would have stayed locked up in his room, and he would have at least come on down to the gymnasium to do some training. But perhaps his habits had changed during their time apart, as Eugene hadn't visited the gymnasium even once. That said, the idea of personally going to visit him somehow pricked at her self-esteem. Seal glared at the castle while kicking holes in the innocent ground. They did say that Lord Genos went in there with him, Seal recalled. Could it be that they were really trying to persuade Eugene to join the Knights of the Black Lion? This sudden thought caused Seal to unconsciously grin. Genos Lionheart was the captain of the 2nd Division. Although Seal might have been able to charm most of the adults she had met, Genos was a difficult opponent to overcome even for her. Seal wasn't the only one who found Genos difficult to confront. Among the Knights of the Black Lion, Genos could count himself alongside the likes of Carmen and Dominic as one of the most skilled warriors in the entire knightly order. That was why Seal had made several attempts to build up rapport with Genos. But no matter how much work she put into it, she never seemed to be able to make any progress. Genos had a strict personality, and perhaps taking after their captain, even the Knights of the 2nd Division that was led by Genos didn't really interact with the other units. If possible, it would be a lot better if Eugene joined the 3rd Division instead of the 2nd Division, Seal yearned wistfully. From the first time that Carmen had met Eugene, she had intended to offer him the position of squire to the captain of the 2nd Division. Even in Seal's view, this was quite the attractive proposition. It was an offer to become the squire of not just any captain, but Captain Genos, who was known to have outstanding skill even compared to the other Knights of the Black Lion. Seal continued her train of thought. After all, the 2nd Division rarely stays for long at the Black Lion Castle. Although the contents of their training were different for each division, the training of the 2nd Division seemed especially harsh when compared to the other units and emphasized actual combat. Although they were currently staying in the castle in order to take part in the coming-of-age ceremony, the 2nd Division's usual routine was to wander the most uncivilized regions of the continent. So, if it was at all possible, Seal hoped that Eugene would enter the 3rd Division instead of the 2nd Division. After all, it wasn't like there were any disadvantages to doing so, right? If they could belong to the same unit, then they could stay together no matter where the unit went. They could share meals together every day, wear the same uniform, and even receive the same training. Seal just stood there absent-mindedly as she imagined what Eugene would look like wearing the uniform of the Knights of the Black Lion. After giggling to herself like this, Seal turned around and left without any regrets. Seeing as they've been talking so long, it looks like Lord Genos's persuasion seems to be working. Since that was the case, she shouldn't interfere. If it was the strict Lord Genos who was talking to Eugene, there was no way that he would be swayed by Eugene's silver tongue, and even Eugene wouldn't be able to disregard Lord Genos, who was both skillful and shared a similar attitude to Eugene when it came to training. But what if it was Carmen trying to convince him? Lady Carmen is... Of course she's a good person, but... Seal trailed off without finishing her thought. In any case, Seal was having fun imagining that Eugene might come to think positively about joining the Knights of the Black Lion. As long as he became Genos's squire to start with, wouldn't she eventually be able to coax him to transfer over to her division? Seal felt like she was overflowing with confidence as she thought of this. With a wicked smile on her face, she walked away from the part of the castle where Eugene was staying. Not a single thought in this wicked girl's head was given to her poor twin brother. What reasons were there for her to care about that brother of hers, who had been beside her ever since they were born and whom she had spent 18 years of her life living with? In any case, it wasn't like he had any truly deplorable sides to him like you had, so Cyan was sure to arrive at the castle after overcoming the various difficulties lying in wait for him. On the next day, after finishing her breakfast in a hurry, Seal headed straight to the front of the castle. Normally, she would have been training under Carmen's watchful eye, but since the day before, Carmen had been occupied with the council meeting. What's so important that they have to discuss it for more than a day? Seal idly thought to herself. As far as Seal knew, the current state of the Lionheart clan was pretty peaceful. Among the many collateral branches, there were no misbehaving families, and even the barbarians beyond the southern border of the empire had been keeping to themselves for the past several years. Under these circumstances, Uid was the only thing consistently occupying the attention of the Knights of the Black Lion. Even now, the lieutenant of the 6th Division was away from the Black Lion Castle, having been assigned to keep an eye on Uid in the Bassar fief. Seal shrugged, although I don't know what's going on. For now, it didn't have anything to do with Seal. Could today be the day that Eugene finally came out of his room? Carrying these high expectations, Seal arrived at the guest quarters in the castle. Seal's eyes blinked in surprise as she took in the scene that greeted her. In the center of a broad gymnasium, Genos was swinging his sword. Eugene was standing at a slight distance, observing Genos's movements. From her first glance at this scene, Seal could only think of one explanation for this. Seal immediately pasted on a bright smile and walked over to Genos and Eugene. Noticing her arrival, Genos stopped swinging his sword, and preemptively shot a glance at Eugene. "What are you doing here?" Eugene asked in place of a greeting. This would have been enough to offend almost anyone else, but Seal didn't seem to take any offense and instead just smiled cheerfully. "So you've decided to become Lord Genos's squire, right?" Seal asked confidently. This had to be the case. If not for that, then there was no reason for the two of them to have been out here in the gymnasium so early in the morning. On top of that, Genos seemed to be showing Eugene a demonstration of his sword techniques for teaching purposes. "You've made a good choice. Lord Genos is the most skilled warrior even amongst the Knights of the Black Lion." Cyan flattered Genos to further ensnare Eugene. Seal wasn't actually spouting nonsense either. Dominic, for instance, had the Annihilation Hammer Jiggalath, while Carmen had been taught the White Flame formula. Since Genos was just as strong as either of them despite not having any kind of special advantage, it was safe to say that he was the most skilled amongst all the Knights of the Black Lion. Seal. Genos spoke up as he hesitantly shot a glance at Eugene. Since they were both members of the Knights of the Black Lion, Genos felt no need to address Seal as young lady. "It seems like you're misunderstanding something." "Huh?" Seal looked at him questioningly. "I haven't taken young Master Eugene as my squire," Genos explained. Seal's eyes widened at these words. Barely managing to hold on to the smile that threatened to slip from her face, Seal tilted her head to the side and asked, "What exactly do you mean by that? Didn't you spend a long time talking to Eugene about it yesterday?" Genos hesitated. "That's..." Seal kept speaking. "And aren't you teaching Eugene your sword techniques right now? Why would you be guiding him in your sword techniques if you haven't even taken him as your squire?" The one who was receiving guidance was actually Genos himself, but it was impossible for him to admit to such a thing. Although he hadn't drawn on his mana when he was performing the technique, the move that Genos had been demonstrating was the dead end recorded among the Hamel-style techniques. This was a skill that worked in conjunction with Azura Rampage to drive one's opponent into inevitable doom. By spraying out a dense net of sword force like a spider's web with the Azura Rampage, this brilliant sword technique could restrict an opponent's movements before finishing them off. "Although I haven't become his squire, I can still receive some instruction on swordsmanship, can't I?" Eugene responded to Seal's questions with an apathetic expression. This was of course just an excuse. There was not a single thing that he could learn from the dead end that Genos had just performed. Inside Eugene's head, there were countless techniques that were cleaner and far more deadly than that. Of course, there was no reason to disparage Genos's skill because of this. Even when looking at him from the perspective of Eugene's previous life, Genos was an extremely skillful warrior. However, since Genos's abilities were rooted in the Hamel style, Eugene couldn't help but have an overwhelming advantage over him if it came to a battle. "Why?" Seal whined, her cheeks puffing up as she pouted. "What do you mean, why?" Eugene changed the subject. "Have you eaten before coming here?" "I have," Seal sulkily admitted. "But I haven't eaten anything yet," Eugene informed her. Successfully distracted, Seal asked, "What have you been up to that's so important that you still haven't eaten?" "I was just planning on getting something to eat when I had the time," Eugene replied. "Sir Genos, Why don't we head on inside now and get something to eat? Or would you prefer to return to your own quarters first? I'll get something to eat once I've returned to my quarters, Genos replied with a cough as he sheathed his sword. Judging from the situation, it seemed that Seal would also be taking part in the meal, and Genos was afraid that he might make a mistake and reveal something that he shouldn't if put on the spot. What if he accidentally let slip the words senior brother while Seal was in hearing range? Genos was well aware of how wicked and manipulative Seal Lionheart could be. Although it had been less than 2 years since she had joined the Knights of the Black Lion, she had been able to firmly establish her footing with a smile that allowed her to get out of any trouble, as well as her own cunning manipulations. If he spilled the words senior brother in front of Seal, she would definitely not allow the slightest mistake to slip past her. Genos had no desire to have his weakness seized by this young lady and used to play with him. If that's the case, it looks like I'll be eating alone, said Eugene. I'll eat with you, Seal insisted. Didn't you say that you just ate before coming here? I only ate a little bit, so it's fine. You'll get fat if you eat too much, Eugene warned her. Do I look like I've gotten fat? Seal coldly asked with narrowed eyes. While this conversation was taking place, Genos had quickly left the room with a cautious, stealthy stride. Eugene eyed Seal uncertainly. I think you have a little? I just grew a bit taller and put on some muscle, Seal retorted as she stormed off ahead of Eugene. However, it seemed like Eugene's accusation continued to bother her. Although she did accompany Eugene to the dining room so that they could eat together, Seal barely touched her food and just rested her chin on a cradle formed from her hands. Despite Seal's blatant and heavy gaze resting squarely on him, Eugene just continued to eat without any distractions. Does it taste good? Seal eventually asked. Eugene gave his compliments. It looks like they've got some good chefs here. If you join the Knights of the Black Lion, you can eat delicious food like this every day, tempted Seal. You really are persistent, Eugene merely replied. After I've worked so hard to try and persuade you, can't you just pretend not to notice and let me win? Seal whined. Eugene denied her the satisfaction. I prefer winning over losing. Who in the world doesn't want to win when they can? Seal muttered as she pouted her lips. Even so, she decided to give up and stop bothering Eugene any further. Seal's stubbornness was strong enough that it wouldn't lose to anyone, but Eugene's stubbornness was just as strong. Changing the subject, Seal asked, So what did you do in Aroth? How quick of you to ask, Eugene noted sarcastically. Yesterday wasn't the right time to ask you about it, Seal excused herself. Instead of answering her question, Eugene had one of his own. So what do you expect me to say to you? You'll probably say that you were busy studying magic. See, looks like you're already well aware of what I was up to. But apart from that, wasn't there anything else that you were busy with? I've heard that you also got close to Arotha's crown prince during your time there. What does that have to do with me being busy? Weren't you invited to any of the parties or social events hosted by the royal family? Or else, did Sir Lovelian ever introduce you to the promising young wizards of Aroth? Seal asked tentatively. Eugene stopped eating only to burst out into laughter. Do you really think that I would enjoy that kind of thing? No, you wouldn't. Reassured by Eugene's answer, Seal smiled bashfully. Still, don't you think that you should slowly accumulate some experience with those sorts of things? Why should I? Eugene raised an eyebrow. You and I will both soon become adults. That means we'll be old enough to attend parties and be expected to socialize. Hey now, someone take a look at what this girl is saying. So, since you've been quiet up until now, you've decided that once you become an adult, it's okay for you to party hard, right? No, it's not like that, but if it's partying around with you, I think it'll be a lot of fun, Seal admitted. Why are you just leaving your brother out of the equation? Eugene asked with amusement. My brother has a lot of people looking to drag him out for some fun apart from me and you. Besides, I think that my brother will be extremely busy starting from next year. Many noble families, and maybe even the royal families of other nations, will be trying to introduce their eligible maidens to him. As she said this, Seal leaned her body closer to Eugene. He might even be the earliest of all of us to get married. This is supposed to be a secret, but there just so happens to be a young princess from the Sea Kingdom Shimuan. She might be a long way away from succeeding the throne, but she's still a member of the royal family. So what about her? Eugene prompted. There's a possibility that she might be engaged to Cyan. Nothing has been finalized yet, but the elders of the council are pushing forward the proposal. Cyan lowered her voice as she continued. And it's not just Shimuin either. You know about the Ruhr kingdom, right? The princess of that country is also one of Cyan's prospective spouses. The Ruhr kingdom. The moment that he heard that the princess was from there, Eugene couldn't help but imagine something that was, by all rights, an unimaginable sight. The princess was a descendant of Molin, so if the princess just so happened to resemble Molin. Eugene suddenly pictured in his head a Molin who had grown his hair out and was wearing a poofy dress. At the same time, he also recalled the sight of Gargith wearing his formal garment laced with ruffled frills. Eugene gagged. Disgusting. What's so disgusting? Seal asked in surprise. Oh, it's nothing. Anyway, so how old are the princesses in question? The princess of Shimuin is the same age as us, but the princess of Ruhr should currently be 9 years old? Are you really saying that Cyan could be getting married to a young girl who's currently just 9 years old? What does it matter that she's currently 9 years old? It's not like she's going to be staying 9 forever. I just can't see it that way. Cyan getting married to someone who's 10 or more years younger. That would be a crime not even the heavens can forgive. So you're saying that you're not interested in anyone who is younger than you? Seal asked, her eyes sparkling with interest. I would just prefer it if any romantic partner I had was around the same age. As he said this, Eugene couldn't help but feel a strong sense of disassociation. Although he had been reincarnated, if you based his age on when he had been first born, Eugene was over 300 years old. Eugene realized something. The only ones whose ages are close to mine are the elves or maybe the dragons. No, just because someone had been around 300 years ago, that didn't mean that they were necessarily 300 years old. In his past life as Hamel, he had died at the age of 38, and with his 20 years as Eugene, he could technically be considered to be in his 50s. As such, if he was looking for someone in her 50s, that would be someone like Carmen, Tanis, Ancilla, or Melkith. Eugene decided to stop thinking about this. Anyway, I don't think that age is really that important, Eugene confidently stated. Why are you going back on your words? Seal asked in disappointment. The human heart has always been like a leaf in the wind. Eugene insisted. Still, if we go by what you said earlier, you would prefer someone who is of a similar age to you over someone who is younger than you, right? Seal persisted in asking. Why are you treating this like such an important issue? Just when do you plan on getting married? I don't have any plans to do so, though. Seal's expression immediately froze stiff. Why not? She immediately demanded. Don't you realize that marriage is a blessing? Aren't we a bit too young to have to start talking about marriage already? Eugene pointed out. If Cyan gets married before you do, that means you'll have lost to Cyan. Why would me getting married later than Cyan count as losing to him? Who exactly is getting married? A voice demanded as the door to the dining room was slammed open. Without any surprise, Eugene calmly turned his head to face the new arrival. This was because he had detected signs of Cyan's presence before the latter had even opened the door. However, since Seal wasn't able to do this, she couldn't help but stare at Cyan with a surprised expression on her face. Why have you arrived so early? She asked. Are you disappointed by my premature arrival? A shabby-looking Cyan spat out as he panted harshly. He had wandered through the forest for an entire day fighting ghosts, monsters, and knights. He hadn't been able to even eat or drink anything, let alone get some sleep. I thought you would be lost for a few days at least, Seal muttered in disappointment. Who the hell do you think I am? Cyan roared angrily as he staggered over to them. After having gone through all kinds of hardship and finally arriving at the Black Lion Castle, he hadn't even been properly greeted with a single word of congratulations. This was because the Patriarch and all the elders of the council were still gathered around the round table, having their discussions. If it was just that, then Cyan could have endured it. However, the news that Eugene had arrived at the castle a day earlier than him had made Cyan's heart boil over with frustration. Even though he had been well aware that Eugene wouldn't find things as challenging as he had still expected Eugene to have arrived earlier that morning. Eugene had made it to the castle less than an hour after they had both fallen into the forest. Did you get to see a lot of ghosts? Seal asked him teasingly. Don't say anything about ghosts, Cyan threatened her. Seal ignored his warning. If you're here, does that mean you were able to defeat the ghosts? Cyan defended himself. Well, you can slice a person, a monster, or a demonic beast to death with a sword, but there's no way to slice a ghost to death. Strictly speaking, ghosts are just a type of undead. They're still just monsters, so why can't you kill them? The reason why you weren't able to kill them is just that you're too weak, isn't it? Seal taunt. The undead and ghosts are different. The ones I'm afraid, no, I mean the ghosts that I hate are different from the ghosts that are considered part of the undead. As he declared this with a scowl, Cyan sat down next to Eugene. Eugene pinched his nose to block off the complex and noxious stench, seemingly a mixture of various different scents, that was wafting over from Cyan. Your body is giving off a rotten odor, Eugene accused him. I'm already aware of that, so just be quiet. After I get something to eat, I'll wash up and go to sleep. Muttering this, Cyan grabbed some cutlery for himself. However, Cyan wasn't able to wash up and get some sleep as he had planned. This was because as soon as their meal was over, the butler arrived bearing a message. An important guest will be arriving soon, so please make your preparations and head over to the warp gate, the butler relayed. Is the guest really so important that we all need to go out to meet them? Cyan asked with a look of despair on his face. But I didn't hear anything about a guest arriving? Seal inquired with a puzzled expression. These words caused the butler's expression to stiffen slightly as he bowed his head and explained, we also haven't received any word to be prepared for a guest. It is likely that they have been specially invited to join in the meeting held at the round table. So who are they? Seal asked as he got up from his seat. The butler announced, the guest soon to be arriving is Auxiliary Bishop Christina, from the Holy Empire.